Hi guys, in this video I will show you how to create a to-do list using React. So I'm going to use Vite web development server to host my files. So to use Vite, we have to use this command called npm create Vite. So after that it will ask us to name our project. I'm going to name it as to-do list. After that it will ask us what library we want. I'm going to select React and then JavaScript. So after that we have to head out to this application called to-do list and then install. It will install the necessary packages that are needed for our application. Just wait for some time. So now the packages are successfully installed for our application. So let's open this application in our VS Code by using command called code dot so that our application will be opened in VS Code. So to run our application, we have to use this command called npm ramdev and enter. After that, it will host our application in this port number called 5173. Let's open it in browser. So this is the default output. Now let's remove the unnecessary files. Let's remove this public default file. After that, let's remove this address folder and let's remove the default styles of in app.css as well as index.css. And also let's remove this unnecessary code as well as this use state. Also remove this import statements. Also remove this use state for now. So now if you see our output in browser, it is empty. So first, let's create a header with content to-do list. So I'm going to create header in a separate component called header. So inside this src folder, I'm going to create a folder with name components, and inside this component, I'm going to create a file with name header.jsx. So let's export this by using RFC. It will create a boilerplate. So inside this, let's give a class name for this div tag with name header container, and inside this, let's add an h1 element with content to do list. Okay, now let's create another component called to-do.jsx and let's export it. Now you can import this to-do component inside this app.jsx. Okay, now it is imported. Now let's import this header component inside this to-do.js inside this to-do component. Now if we refresh the browser, you can see the output of the header component. Now let's add some background color to this header component and also make the text to be centered. So for that, let me create a folder with name styles inside this source folder, and inside the styles folder I'm going to add a file with name header.css. Now let's import this header.css file inside this header component by using import slash styles and then header.css. So I close all files. So you can see, let's select this header container inside this header.css file. Header container. Let's add some background color of dark blue violet. Now you can see there is a background color for the header component. Now let's change this text color from black to white and also make this text to be centered. So for that, you need to select this h1 which is inside this header container. So dot header container and then h1. Let's make the color to white and then text align should be center. So now you can see our font is our text is centered. Now let's add some padding to this header container. Add some padding of 10 pixels. So now it's looking good. Let's remove this margin by so since our root file is app.jsx, we can apply the styles to the body inside this app.css file by making margin of 0. Now you can see the gap is removed. Now let's change this font style by using font family of, let's add this Gill Sans font. Now it's looking good. So now let's create a input element here. So for that, let me close all these files. Let's go inside this tool.jsx file and create a div tag with class name child. Inside this, let's create a form, and inside this form, we're going to create an input tag with placeholder enter enter a to do. Let's add a button with content add. Now if you see the output, the input is successfully rendered into our web page. Now let's add some gap between this header component and this input. So for that, we have to select this. So let's create a CSS file with name todo.css, and let's import this todo.css inside this todo component by using input dot styles todo.css. Now let's select this child child display of flex, and then margin should be 100 px of top and bottom order. So now there will be a gap between this header component and this input. Let's make this centered using justify content center. Now let's add some gap between this input and button. So our input and button elements are inside this form, and the form element is inside this child. So let's select the form using dot child form and display of flex and add some gap of 10 pixels. Now there is a gap between this input and button. Now let's add some background color to this child. So let's add some background color of blue violet. Let's add a dark color. Now it's looking good. Let's give some padding and decrease the width. Padding of 10 pixels and width of 500 pixels. Okay, now let's add some border radius of 10 pixels, and also change the background color of this body to some dark color. So for that we have to go inside this app.css file, add some background color of some light black. Let's add some more dark color. Okay, I think now it's looking good. Let's change this background color of the input element. So form input, add some padding for the input element of 10 pixels, border radius of 10 pixels, font size of 22 pixels, and color white color, and background color should be the same color which is applied for this child. So now you see the output. Let's remove the border for the input element by making border none. Okay. If you so after focusing on this input element, outline is appearing. Let's remove that by using form input focus. Let's make the outline to be none after whether focus on the input. Now, if I focus on this input, outline is not appearing. Now, let's add some box shadow to this input element so that it will be good. Let's add some box shadow of pixels of some gray color. Okay, it's looking good. Now, let's add some style to this button element. Font button. Let's add font size of 22 pixels. Adding of 10 pixels and add some border radius of 10 pixels. Make the border none. Let's add some background color to this button element. Uh, Background color, some light green. Let's make the color to white. Okay, now let's make the cursor pointer to this button tag. Like if I hover on this button element, it is showing arrow only. Let's make this to the pointer. So the button, let's make its pointer. So now if I hover on this add button, the hand icon is displaying. So okay, now let's add a state variable to store the details entered by user in this input element. So whenever user types something here like play, we are going to store this in a state variable. So let's create a state variable inside this to do component with variable name, user input, and then function set user input. So this set user input is a function which is used to update the values of this user input variable. Now use state. So it is going to be object with three properties. ID, initially ID will be one, and the name. Initially the value of this name property should be an empty string, and then checked. So you will later understand why I have added checked property inside this user input variable. I will explain this later. So let's add another state variable which is used to store the values of this user input variable. So like todos. So this todos variable is responsible for storing all the user input variable values, and then set todos function to update the values of this todos variable, and this will be an array. Use state and then array. So inside this array, we are going to store this user input variable, which is objects. So we are going to store. So this to do element is an array of objects. So let's make this type to be submit. So on submitting the form, we are going to call a function called handle submit. So this handle submit function is responsible for displaying all the to-dos. Wait, I think something went wrong. Okay, handle submit is not defined. Let me create that handle submit function. Handle submit. So this handle submit function is responsible for displaying all the to-dos entered by user to be appeared here. So after typing play and after clicking on this add button, the to-do will be displayed. To-do should displayed here. So Let's make this prevent default. So this prevent default function is used to, so let me explain that with example. So if I remove this and if I type something here like play and then add, this to do is removing. This to do is automatically getting disappeared. So to prevent it, we have to use this e.prevent default function. So now if I type something like play and click on submit, this value will not be removed from here. So if I click on this add, we can see this, the value entered by user input is not removed from this input tag. So now after clicking on the submit, we are going to store this to do inside this to do's variable. So for that, we are going to add set to do's, and then since to do's is an array, we are going to add array here. So dot dot dot. This three dot represents a spread operator, which is used to store the previous state values. So dot 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 to do's comma present value entered by user. So we also have to add an on-change attribute here, which is responsible for updating the value of user input, like set user input, and then dot 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 previous values plus present name should be e dot target dot value. Let's console the value of user input variable so that you can understand it better. So this should be user input. So if you see the console, you can see initially the values of this user input is id1, name empty, and checked is false. So that are displaying. So whenever I'm going to type something here, that value will be updated inside this user input variable and in the property of name. You can see play is displaying here. If I enter it, and then it will be displayed here. So now I think you guys understand that. That's now whenever user types something here and clicks on submit button, we are going to display it here. So for that, we are going to first of all let me add let me console the to do's so that you will understand better. So if I type play and then add, you can see initially it is an empty object, and if I type eat, now it is updating the previous value. So to get real-time values, let me remove this from here and let's use effect hook. Use effect. The first parameter is a callback function. The second is a dependency. So whenever the value of to-dos will be changed, this use effect hook will automatically re-rendered. So inside this I am going to console.log is to-dos value. Now if I refresh it and if I type play and clicks on add, we can see the value of to-dos is updating empty from empty array to one value entered by user. So now if I type it, the length of this to-dos variable will be 2. Now you can see the length is 2. So you can see the to-dos variable is an array of object. So if you are familiar with JavaScript, I think you guys know about map function, which is used to loop through this array. So let's use the map function here. So to use JavaScript code inside this JSX, we have to give curly braces and we have to write the JavaScript logic inside this curly braces. Now I'm going to use todos.map and then to do. So let's create a separate component for displaying the to do list. So I'm going to name the file as to do list.jsx and let's export this component. So this component is responsible for displaying all the to-dos list entered by user. So for that we have to first import the to-do list component and then we have to pass this to-do value so that this to-do list component can able to access the value of this to-do. So to-do is equals to to-do and we also have to add key property which is to-do.id. So now accept this props inside here. Inside here, the props should be to do and key, comma to do. Now let's render it by using to do dot id dot to do dot name. So let's refresh it and type something like play. Now we are getting the value, but it is not displaying here. I think we made a mistake here. So we have to return this component. Now let's create it like play. After clicking on add, it is coming here, but this should be come here. I think I made some mistake. So this is inside here. Okay, we have to change the styles of this child. It is display flex. We have to make the flex direction should be column. So now you can see the value entered by me is displayed here. So if I type something it and then it is coming here. Let's make some styles to this to-do list. So for that we have to import a CSS style sheet for this to-do list component. So let's go to the styles folder and let's create a file called to-do list.css and let's load this CSS file inside this to-do list component. Import dot styles and then to do list.css. Let's add a class name to this div tag like to do list container. Now let's select this inside this CSS file dot to do list container display of flex. Let me add something. Play. Okay, let's make this text color from black to white. Dot to do list container. I have to select this p tag. Let's increase the font size to 20 pixels and color from black to white. So now you can see it is clear. Let's add some border to this to-do list. So let's add some box shadow of 001 px of some gray color. Okay, now it's looking good, but we have to say we have to give some gap between these two tags. So for that we have to select this dot child todo.css file. Let's add some gap of 10 pixels. Okay, now it's looking good. Let's add some border radius for this to-do list. So border radius of 10 pixels. So let's add some box shadow of 2 pixels instead of 1 pixels. So it will be brighter. Now you can see we add play and then eat. So we have to make this we have to make increase the values of the ID whenever user submits whenever user clicks on this add button. So for that we have to go this inside this todo.jsx file. So after submitting the form, we are going to make this ID to be the previous value plus one. So for that, going to set the other input and ID should be previous value dot ID plus one. Sorry, this should be user input dot ID plus one. So now let me refresh it. If I type play and then eat, you can see the value is increased for the second to do. So whenever you have type something here and clicks on add button, we have to remove this value from this input tag. So for that we have to use here after submitting the form, we are going to make the variable of we are going to make the value of this property name to its initial state, which is an empty string. So now if now let's refresh it. Clicks on play. So after clicking it, this should be removed, but it is not removing. I think we have to get the previous value of this user input. Now let's try it again. It is not removing. I think we have made mistake inside here. Okay, we are not giving an initial value to this input element. So initially it should be user input dot name. Now let's take it again. After entering play and clicks, now you can see the to do entered by user is removing after clicking on this add button. See, if I click on it, this it, the text it will be removed after clicking on this add button. You can see. So okay, let's make this input to be centered. So for that, I think we have to select form put. Let's give display flex, justify content center. It's not working. Display flex. Okay, not here. It should be inside this form. Justify content center. Now it will be centered. You can see it is centered. Let's so here there are two to dos here. We are going to add a footer and inside that footer we are going to display total to dos. So for that we have to create another component called footer with name footer.jsx, and let's export it by using this. And inside, let's load this footer component inside our main component, which is todo.jsx. And let's import it here by using footer. So to display the total number of to-dos, we have to create another state variable. So let's create a state variable with name total to-dos, and then function which is used to update the total to-dos variable. So initially it is 0, but whenever user submits the form, it is going to be previous value plus 1. So, so total to-dos, the initial value plus 1, not initial value, current value plus 1. So let's pass this total to this variable to this footer component. So let's add a prop with name total to this, and this will be the value. Okay, now let's use this value inside this footer component. Let's first accept the props, which is total to this. Let's add a class name to this footer container, and let's add a style sheet to this component inside this footer.css. Let's add this file inside this footer component using import dot styles and then footer.css. Inside this, let's make this as h2 element and accept this to total to this. Now if we see, I think we have to load this footer outside this, outside the child element. Now you can see it is appeared here. Let's add some background color. Let me close all. Let's open footer.jsx and footer.css. So let's add some background color by selecting this footer container. Dot footer container. Let's make the background color which is applied for this header container. Let's copy it and paste it inside here. Let me close this and open this footer.jsx. And let's select this h2 tag and make the text color to be white. So initially it is black, you can see it is not visible clearly. So let's select that h2 tag, make the color should be white and text align should be center. Now if you see this good, let's add some padding of 10 pixels, and let's move this footer component from here to the bottom of the web page. So for that, you can simply use position fixed and bottom of 0. Now it will be here. Let's add the width of 100%. So now it's looking good. Let's add a string like total to dos. So for that, total to dos, and then here. Now it's looking good. So Whenever I type something here and clicks on this add button, this total to dos count will be increased. You can see after clicking on, you can, you will see. Let me click this add button. So after clicking on the add button, you can see that total to dos count will be increased. Is increased. Let's add another to do. The count will be increased. So now let's add a button element to this to do list. So let me close this and open to do list.jsx as well as to do list.css file. So let's add a button with content delete. Now you can see delete is visible. Let's make the line item center so that this height will be decreased. So to do list container, let's make this line item center and justify content space between so that there will be a space between these two elements. Let's add some padding to this delete button. Let's select that using button. Add some padding of 10 pixels. Border radius 10 pixels. Color should be white. Let's add background color of red. Some light red. Now it's looking. Let's remove the border and also increase the font size of 22 pixel. Okay, now it's looking good. Let's make the cursor pointer. So after hovering on this, a hand icon will be displayed. Initially it is displaying an arrow button, you can see. So let's add cursor pointer. Now if I hover on the delete button, hand icon is displaying. So now let's add a functionality to this delete button so that after clicking on this delete button, we have to remove this to do from the to do list. So we have to add an on click attribute for this button tag. On clicking on this, we are going to call a function called handle delete. Let's create that handle delete function. Let me add that to do again. Play. So after clicking on this delete button, we have to loop through this values. These values are inside this to do variable. So let's pass this to dos and set to dos to this to do list component. To dos is equal to dos and set to dos is equal to set to dos. So let's accept this props inside this to do list component. To dos comma set to dos. So after clicking on the delete button, we're going to call this set to dos function and we are going to loop through this to dos variable, which is an array of objects. And if you are familiar with JavaScript, I think you guys know about this filter function. The filter function is returns the elements of an array that meet the condition. So we are going to create a condition inside. Let's give another callback function called delete to do. Let's create it. So let's open the console. Let me explain it clearly. So many errors. Refresh it. Let's add play and then it. Ignore this error for now. We will solve it later. So now you can see we have two objects inside the array variable, which is to dos. So for every object, we are going to call a callback function called delete to do. So this delete to do function will accept a parameter. You can give any name you want. So for the first iteration, this current parameter represents this object, first object, and for the second iteration, this current object represents this second object. So return all the items which are not equal to the present to do. So for every element in the to-dos, we're calling this delete to-do function, and this delete to-do function will return all the elements which satisfy these conditions, which satisfies this condition. So if I click on this delete button, it will be removed from our to-do. Now our to-dos object to-dos array is updated with. Okay, now let's add a tick mark here for every to do. So for that, you can simply go to Font Awesome, which provides so many icons. So I already have an account. That's why I'm getting this interface. So if you create this account, you will get the interface like this. So after that, you can simply go to this Your Kit section, and after that, click on these icons. After that, scroll to bottom, and then you can get this unique kit, copy it, and then paste it inside this index.html file. So after pasting it, we can use all the icons which are provided by this Font Awesome website. So we want the tick icon, so we can click on check. After that, it will give the tick icons. So let's copy this and paste it here. Let's create a span element, paste it here. Since React does not have an attribute called class, you have to give it as class name instead of class. So let's give a class name for this as well, like check icon container. So now if I refresh it and add a to do, you can see check icon. So it is black color. Let's make the color from black to white and increase some font size to that. So for that, we have to go to this to do list.css file, and then check icon container. Sorry, I'm making so many typos. And color white, and add some font size of 22 pixels. Now you can see it clearly. Okay, now let's add another value here with completed to-dos, so that after clicking on this icon, the completed to-dos should be updated. So for that, you can go to this footer.jsx file. Let's add h2 with completed to-dos. Let's add another state variable to maintain that completed to-dos. So let's add completed to-dos, and then set completed to-dos function, which is used to update this value. Initially it is 0. Now let's pass this props to this footer component. Let's pass this completed to-dos variable to this footer component using completed to-dos is equals to completed to-dos. Let's accept this prop inside this footer.jsx file. Completed to-dos. Let's accept this value inside this JSX code completed to this. Now it is showing here. Let's make the display flex so that these two values will be came in same line, will come in same line. So for that we have to go inside photo.css file. Let's make display flex. Let's make justify content center, and also let's give some gap between this two words. Let's give some gap of 10 pixels. Okay, after that you can simply remove this. I think it's good. So after clicking on this hand icon, this should be updated. This should be updated like it is completed. So before updating this completed to this, first of all, after clicking on this, we have to make this checked property value to be false from true, and then we have to loop through this to this variable and get all the objects which are having checked value as true. So for that, we have to create another state variable inside this to-do list component, like is checked and set is checked, which is a function to update the is checked variable. And then this we have to give the value for this is checked variable. We have to give this user input. We have to give this checked value for this is checked variable. So for that, we have to give to do dot checked. So after clicking on it, we have to make this checked from false to true. Initially, each checked value is false, right? To do dot checked is false initially, but after clicking on this tick icon, we have to make that true. So for that, let me add on click attribute here. On clicking this, we are going to call back a function which is handle check. Let's create this handle check function here. So on clicking this handle check, on clicking this tick mark, we have to make this to dot checked from false to true. For that, we have to call set is checked, and then we have to use not operator, which is used to give the opposite value of the current value. So current value is false, but after clicking on tick icon, this handle check function will be called, and inside this we are calling set is checked function, which is setting the checked value from false to true. So after clicking on this check icon, we have to get the to-do name and pass the to-do name as an argument inside this handle check function. So it should be to-do.name, and let's say accept this argument as a parameter here with name to-do name. So now let's create a variable like check to-dos. So this check to-dos variable will loop through this to-dos variable, and on every element we are going to call this callback function. This will return all the element. Let me give name. If it is equal to the to do name, if it is true, we are going to copy the initial state of the element as well as check it from false to true. So if it is false, we are just calling, we will just return the element. So after that we have to update the to-dos with this check with to-dos. So this check with to-dos variable will loop through this to-dos variable. Let me open it on console. So let's add play. Let's eat key is not defined. Key here. So I have to remove this so that this error will be gone. If I refresh it and again add to this, let me control the this check code to this. There and it. So after clicking on this check icon, you can see the value of checked is changed from false to true after clicking on this tick icon. So if I again click on this, then this object will be changed from false to true. So if I click on this tick icon, if you see, it will make the checked value change from false to true. So now we have to loop through this and filter out all the checked values and give the length and return the length of the objects which are having value as true and display it here. So for that we have to define another function inside this to do component. Let's add a function called update completed to do's. This will accept a parameter called count, and this function is responsible for updating the completed to do's with this count parameter. Now let's pass this function to this to do list component. Update completed to do's equals to update completed to do's. Now we can use this function inside this to do list component. First of all, let me accept that update completed to this function. Now let's call that function update completed to this, and inside this we are going to loop through this check with to do's variable, which is an array, and we are going to filter out all the values. Let's add it as element dot checked, and then we are going to return the length of this check with to do's variable which are having the checked value as true. So let's see if it works or not. Yeah, added to do it. If I click on this, you can see the completed to this is changed from 0 to 1. So again, if I click on this will be 2. If I click on this again, it should be false. Sorry, not false, it should be decreased. So let's add a style to this tick icon. Like if I clicked on this, we are going to add some background color as green for this tick icon so that we can understand whether the to do is completed or not. So for that, okay, let's create a variable called checked, and inside this I'm going to use ternary operator, which is an alternative way of using if else condition with simple syntax. So inside this I'm going to check whether is checked value is true or false. If is checked is true, I'm going to return a string with name checked, and if it is false, I'm going to return an empty string. So the value of this checked will be checked if this is checked value is true. This is checked value will become true if the tick icon is clicked. So let's accept this checked variable inside this class name. Since the variable is a JavaScript logic, we have to write that inside this curly braces, and I'm going to use template letter, and inside this I'm going to write the previous class name, which is check icon container. Also I'm going to accept this checked, which is an another class name for this span tag. So let's add some styles by selecting this checked inside this CSS file. So dot checked. Let's add some background color of green and make the border radius of 50%, so it will be center. So it will create a rounded shape and add some padding. Now let's check whether it's working or not. So play and then it. So if I click on this check icon, these styles are applied. So after clicking on this check icon, it will go inside. It will call this handle check function, and this handle check function is making the value of each checked from false to true. So if the value of each checked is true, we are going to assign this checked value to this checked. So the value of this checked is checked. We are going to add the styles. So please try to watch more than once, guys, so that you will understand it. So now if I click on this again, this is checked value will become false. Since it is false, the value of this checked variable will become this empty string. Since it is an empty string, this checked styles will not be applied. So I hope you guys have understood. Now if I click on this add, it is giving me the to do even after the to do value is empty. So to prevent that behavior, we have to go inside this handle submit function. So we are going to add a condition. So if this user input dot name is equal to empty string, we are going to, so let's use a toaster react or toast. Let me explain that. So this react or toast will give a pop-up messages like this. So in order to use this, we have to install it first. Let's install it by using npm I react or toast. So it is successfully installed. Now let's run our application again. Now let's import the toaster inside our root file, which is app.jsx. Let's import the toaster, and we are going to use toast inside this to.jsx. So import toast. Now we can use all the functions which are inside this toast function. So we are going to send an error message like if the so if the value of this to do is empty, we are going to display a message like please enter something and click on add. So we have to return this. So now if I refresh and click on this add button, it is not displaying the to do because we are preventing that behavior here. So now let's also add some padding to this to do list so that it will be good. So for that, we have to use this to do list container, add some padding of 10 pixels. Now it's looking good. So let's also add a pseudo clause for this delete button. Like if I click on this delete button, we are going to add a background color as white and color as black. So let's add a style to this button. So whenever the button is clicked, this active pseudo class will be called, and inside this we are going to add style as background color as white and the font color as black. Now if I click on this delete function, the background color. So if I click on this, you can see that our styles are applied. Let's also so after clicking on this delete button, let's also add a toast message like to do deleted successfully. So for that, I have to import the toast. Import toast from React Hot Toast, and then so after clicking on this delete button, we are going to inside this handle delete function, and inside this let's add a message called toast. Let's use the function which is toast.success, and inside this we're going to add a message called to do deleted successfully. Now if we click on this delete button, we're going to get a pop-up message like to do deleted successfully. You can see we are getting a pop-up message like to do deleted successfully. But after deleting the to do, we have to update this total to dos from 1 to 0. So for that, we have to so in order to update this total to dos, we have to accept the total to dos inside this to do list component. So let's pass this total to dos to this to do list component. So total to dos equals to total to dos. Let's accept this inside this to do list component. Total to dos. We also have to pass this set total to this function, which is used to update this total to this variable. So for that, add set total to this is equals to set total to this. Let me make this props up as separate line. Now you can see all the props clearly. So let me refresh it. Type something like play. So after clicking on this delete, we have to update this total to this from 1 to 0. So let's go inside this delete function. Let's accept this prop inside this to-do list. Set total to this. So on clicking on this delete button, on clicking the delete button, we are going to call this handle delete function, and inside this we are calling set total to this, and then present value -1. So now if I click on this delete icon, this total produce count will be decreased from 1 to 0. You can see. Again if I add, total produce is increased. Let's add again, it is increased. Let's delete, the count will be decreased. Let's delete, count will be decreased. But you can see after clicking on this, we are getting the number as 4 instead of 1 for the first to do. So to prevent that behavior, so let me open the folder again. Add the to do. So after clicking on this delete button, we have to go inside this. We have to capture this value of ID and make the ID value from current value -1. So this ID attribute, this ID property is inside this our input variable. So I have to pass this our input variable as well as the set our input function, because we have to update this our input dot ID. So after deleting it, so first of all let me pass this our input and set our input to this to do list component. Our input, our input, set our input, set our input. Let me receive this props inside this to do list component. Again, our input, set our input. So after clicking on delete, we're going to call the set our input function and copy the previous values of this our input variable and make the value of ID to be current ID -1. So after clicking, now let's check it. If I enter play and then it, now if I delete this and add it again, we're getting the number as 2 for the second to do. But if I comment, let me comment it this line. Let me refresh it. If I add play and then it, so here the number is 2. But if I click on delete and add it again, we're getting 3 instead of 2. So if you use this line, you don't gonna get that error. Let's see, play and then eat. So if I click on delete and add it again, we're only getting 2 instead of 3. So I think you have understood that. Okay guys, now let's deploy our application into internet. So before deploying it, we have to push all these files into a GitHub repository. So for that, we have to go to the GitHub website and then let's create a new repository with name to do list, and then let's create it by clicking on this create button. After that, it will create new repository and give a unique link for this repository. This is our GitHub repository URL. So let's go to our application. Let's initialize the Git. So after that, it will initialize the Git repository. After that, we have to use this command git remote add origin, and after that, we have to copy our GitHub repo URL. Let's copy this and paste it here. Now let's add this command git add dot. So this command will push all our files to this GitHub repository. Git add dot. After that, add a message called like new files added, and then let's push it. So after clicking on git push, it will it asks us to write this command. Let's copy it and paste it here, and then click. After that, it will It is successfully pushed all our files into our GitHub repository. So now if I refresh this repo, you can see all these files are successfully pushed into this GitHub repo with name to do list. Now let's export it. Let's export it to the Vercel. So Vercel will host our application. So if you don't have a Vercel account, create one. After that, it will show the interface like this. Now click on Add New and click on Project. I have already added a GitHub account for my Vercel. That's why it is showing the existing GitHub repos that are available in my GitHub account. Now let's import this. After that, it will ask us to name our project. I'm going to name it as to-do list and then deploy. After that, just wait for some time. It will create our application and host it on internet. Just wait for some time. So it says that congratulations, you just deployed a new project to Vercel. Now our project is live on internet. So let me go to dashboard, click on the settings. Let's change the domain name. So initially the name is to-do list 3 blush.vercel app. Let's edit the domain name with to do dot vercel dot app. Click on save. Cannot add since so somebody has already used this domain name. So let me like to do list 100. So it is successful. Now if you type this to do list 100.vercel.app on Chrome, let's type to do list 100.vercel.app. If I click on enter, you can see our project is live on internet. So if click on this and it, you can see our project is successfully working. So if somebody enters this domain name, they will get this project. So that's it for this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching.